A hungry young boy barely has enough food for himself. But when he sees an old homeless man shivering in the cold, he makes a decision that will change his life forever. Jamal Carter was just 10 years old, but he already knew what hunger felt like. The rumbling stomach, the long nights without food, the constant worry in his mother's tired eyes. Food was scarce, but love was plenty. One afternoon, as he walked home from school clutching the only meal he had for the day, a simple peanut butter sandwich, he noticed something that stopped him in his tracks. An old homeless man, frail and shivering, sat against a brick wall, digging through a trash can, hoping to find something to eat. Jamal hesitated. His own stomach growled. He was hungry too. But then he made a decision, one that would change his life forever. You won't believe who this old man really is. What happens when the truth comes out? And how does this boy's small act of kindness lead to an unimaginable reward? Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from and subscribe for more emotional real-life stories. This is a story about kindness, selflessness, and the unexpected rewards that follow when we give from the heart. Jamal Carter clutched his worn-out backpack as he walked home from school, his small frame barely shielding him from the cold wind cutting through the streets. His shoes were too big, the soles scuffed from years of use, and his jacket had holes where the fabric had worn thin. Life had never been easy for Jamal. At just 10 years old, he already understood struggle. Raised by his mother, who worked too, exhausting jobs just to keep a roof over their heads, he had learned early on that every meal was a blessing and every penny mattered. Still, his mother always told him one thing. Kindness costs nothing, Jamal. Even when you have little, you always have something to give. Her words echoed in his mind as he tightened his grip on the sandwich wrapped in a napkin, his only meal, until dinner. As he turned a corner onto a quieter street, he noticed a hunched figure sitting against a brick wall. The man's clothes were tattered, his hands rough and shaking. A thin, dirty blanket was draped over his shoulders, barely offering any protection from the biting cold. Jamal slowed his steps, watching as the old man rummaged through a nearby trash can, pulling out a half-eaten piece of bread before sighing, in disappointment. Something tugged at Jamal's heart. He had been hungry before. He had felt that same gnawing emptiness in his stomach. He knew what it was like to wish for food and not have enough. And in that moment, he made a decision. He reached into his backpack, pulled out his sandwich, and took a step toward the man. Howard Bennett had been sitting on that street corner for weeks, watching people pass him by. Some glanced at him with pity. Others wrinkled their noses and walked faster. Most ignored him entirely, and Howard didn't blame them. He had lost faith in humanity long ago. What people didn't know was that he wasn't actually homeless. Howard Bennett was a millionaire, a former CEO, a man who had spent decades building an empire, until one day he walked away from it all. Wealth had shown him the greed in people's hearts. He had been surrounded by those who only cared about him because of what he could give them. So he made a choice. He left behind his lavish lifestyle, put on ragged clothes, and lived among the poor. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to see if true kindness still existed. And so far, the world had proven him right. People were selfish. No one helped unless there was something in it for them. And yet, as he sat in the cold, pulling his thin blanket tighter around himself, he heard footsteps stop in front of him. He looked up, and saw a young boy. The boy's hands were small, his jacket too thin for the cold, and yet he was holding out a sandwich. Howard narrowed his eyes. What was the catch? The wind howled through the streets, rustling loose newspaper, pages along the pavement. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the struggling neighborhood, where cracked sidewalks and run-down buildings told stories of hardship. Jamal stood in front of Howard, his tiny hands trembling from the cold, yet his grip on the sandwich firm. Howard eyed him cautiously. This was unusual. People didn't give without expecting something in return. And yet, here was this small, hungry boy, offering his only meal. Jamal had no idea that this moment would change both of their lives forever. Jamal stood still, clutching the sandwich in his small hands. He could hear the growl of his own empty stomach, a reminder that this was the only food he had left for the day. But as he watched the old man dig through the trash can, searching for even the smallest scrap to eat, his hunger suddenly didn't seem so important. His mother's words echoed in his mind. Kindness costs nothing, Jamal. Even when you have little, you always have something to give. His fingers hesitated for just a moment. Then he unwrapped the sandwich, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. "Excuse me, sir," he said softly. The old man, hunched over the trash, froze. His fingers, hovering over a half-eaten apple core, clenched slightly as he turned his head. Jamal held out the sandwich. "You can have this." Howard Bennett stared at the boy in disbelief. His weary, sharp eyes scanned Jamal's face, looking for an ulterior motive. People didn't do things like this, not without expecting something in return. His voice came out rough, guarded. "Why would you give your food to me? What do you want?" Jamal blinked, surprised by the question. He looked down at his sandwich, then back at the old man. "I just don't like seeing people go hungry," he said simply. Howard's chest tightened. He had been prepared for a scam, for the boy to ask for money or favors in exchange for his so-called kindness. But there was nothing in the boy's expression except honesty. Howard's gaze flickered to Jamal's own clothes. 2 big, worn-out shoes, a backpack that had seen better days. This kid didn't have much himself, and yet he was giving away the only food he had. For the first time in a long while, Howard felt something stir in his chest, but he wasn't ready to believe it just yet. He looked at the sandwich again, his fingers twitching slightly. Hunger gnawed at him, but pride held him back. Jamal smiled gently. "Go on," he encouraged. Howard hesitated. His entire life, he had seen people only look out for themselves. He had lived in a world where kindness was just another form of manipulation. Could this kid really be different? Finally, his hunger won. With a slow, unsure motion, he reached out and took the sandwich. The moment it was in his hands, he braced himself for the catch. The "now you owe me" moment. But it never came. Jamal just smiled again. "Have a good day, sir." And then he turned to leave. Howard stared after him, stunned. He watched as the boy walked away, his steps light, as if he hadn't just given away his only meal. Howard's fingers tightened around the sandwich. Was this real? He had seen generosity before, but it was always conditional, always followed by an expectation, an agenda. This kid? He had just walked away. Howard's throat tightened. His hands, rough from years of hardship, trembled slightly as he lifted the sandwich to his mouth. He took a bite. The food was simple, but to him it was the best thing he had tasted in years. His eyes followed the boy as he disappeared down the street, completely unaware of the choice he had just made, a choice that would change both of their lives forever. Howard Bennett sat against the same brick wall the next morning, his mind replaying the events of the previous day. He hadn't been able to stop thinking about the boy, the one person who had offered kindness without expecting anything in return. Could it really be that simple? The cold wind bit at his skin, but he barely noticed. For years he had believed that genuine kindness was a myth, that people only gave when they wanted something in return. Yet, that boy had walked away without even asking for his name, and so Howard waited. A part of him didn't believe the boy would come back. Maybe it had been a one-time moment of kindness. Maybe Jamal had just been feeling generous that day. But then he saw him. Jamal walked down the street, his small frame hunched against the morning chill. In his hands was another sandwich, wrapped neatly in a napkin. Howard's breath hitched. He wasn't just passing by, he had come back. Jamal smiled as he approached, his warm brown eyes filled with the same innocence as the day before. Without hesitation, he sat down next to Howard on the cold pavement. "I brought you something," he said, holding out the sandwich. Howard stared at him, his fingers tightening against his worn-out blanket. He had been waiting for this moment, for the boy to ask for something in return. But even now, he didn't. "Why?" Howard asked, his voice rough. "Why are you helping me?" Jamal shrugged. "Because I can." Howard narrowed his eyes. "But you don't have much yourself." Jamal looked down at his clothes, his torn shoes, his too-big jacket. He smiled a little. "My mama always says kindness costs nothing." Howard let out a breath, almost a laugh. "Nothing, huh?" Jamal nodded. "She works 2 jobs just so we can eat. Sometimes we don't have much, but she always finds a way to help others. She says there's always someone who has less." Howard fell silent. This kid had nothing to give. But he gave. Anyway. For years, Howard had convinced himself that the world was selfish, that people only helped when there was something in it for them. But this boy, he had proved him wrong. Howard took the sandwich, his hand shaking slightly. "You're too young to be thinking about things like this," he muttered. "Shouldn't you be playing video games or something?" Jamal grinned. "I would if we could afford them." Howard winced at the honesty. He glanced at Jamal's small hands, red from the cold, his oversized clothes that barely kept him warm. He had nothing, and yet he was the richest person Howard had ever met. Howard exhaled slowly, feeling something shift inside him. He had spent so long looking for the worst in people, and now, sitting beside a boy with nothing, he had found the best. Just as Howard was about to speak, a luxury black car pulled up to the curb. The air in the street shifted instantly. The once quiet morning was now interrupted by the hum of an expensive engine, the gleaming vehicle a stark contrast to the rough streets. Howard immediately sat up straighter, his disguise slipping as the back door swung open. A sharply dressed man in a black suit rushed toward them, his face filled with urgency. "Sir, thank goodness we've been looking for you everywhere." Jamal's eyes widened. "Wait, sir?" Jamal's gaze flicked between the man in the expensive suit and the ragged homeless man sitting beside him. Howard sighed, rubbing his temple. The moment of truth had arrived. Jamal's stomach twisted in confusion. Who was this man? Jamal sat frozen, his eyes darting between the well-dressed driver and the man he had just shared a sandwich with. The homeless man, Mr. Bennett, let out a sigh as he slowly removed his worn-out beanie, revealing neatly combed silver hair beneath it. He straightened his posture, dusting off his ragged coat as if shaking off an identity that no longer belonged to him. Jamal's heart pounded. "Wait, you're not homeless?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Howard Bennett met Jamal's gaze, a knowing smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "No, kid, I'm not." Jamal blinked, his mind racing. None of this made sense. The driver, still slightly out of breath, finally spoke. "Sir, your family has been worried sick. We've been looking for you for weeks." Jamal stared at Mr. Bennett in shock. Family? A driver? Weeks? Mr. Bennett sighed again, rubbing the back of his neck. I know. I didn't exactly tell anyone where I was going." Jamal's hands tightened into fists. He had spent the last 2 days worrying about this old man, bringing him food, sitting with him on the cold pavement, only to find out he wasn't struggling at all. "I don't get it," Jamal finally said. "Why would you pretend to be homeless?" Mr. Bennett's smile faded slightly. He glanced at the car, then back at Jamal. "Because I was looking for something." Jamal's brow furrowed. "What could you possibly be looking for out here?" Mr. Bennett took a deep breath, then leaned forward slightly, his voice lower now. "I wanted to know if kindness still existed." Jamal stared at him, waiting for more. "I had everything," Mr. Bennett continued. "A company, millions of dollars, houses, cars, but I didn't trust people anymore. Everyone who came into my life only wanted something from me. No one ever gave without expecting something back." His eyes darkened for a moment, as if remembering something painful. "So I left it all. I walked away. I put on these old clothes and lived on the streets. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to see if anyone in this world would help a man who had nothing." Mr. Bennett let out a small, dry laugh. "I sat on street corners in front of coffee shops, outside train stations. Thousands of people passed me every day. And do you know how many stopped?" Jamal swallowed. Mr. Bennett held up 2 fingers. 2 people, out of thousands. Jamal's stomach twisted. He had seen people ignore the homeless before. But to hear it like this, it hurt. "One gave me an old apple. The other threw some change at my feet like I wasn't even a person," Mr. Bennett continued. "I was ready to give up. Ready to believe that maybe people really were as selfish as I thought." He paused, looking directly at Jamal now. "And then I met you." Jamal felt his chest tighten. "You didn't know me," Mr. Bennett said, shaking his head. "You didn't owe me anything. You barely had food for yourself, but you still gave me what little you had." Jamal felt heat rush to his face. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. He had just done what his mother taught him. "Most people walk past suffering without a second glance," Mr. Bennett said. "But you stopped. You saw me. And for the first time in a long time, you made me believe that kindness still exists." Jamal didn't know what to say. Mr. Bennett suddenly stood up, shaking his arms as if getting rid of the last traces of his disguise. He turned to his driver. "Call my assistant," he said. "Tell her I'm coming back." Jamal still sat on the ground, his head spinning. This was too much. Then Mr. Bennet looked down at him with a knowing smile. "Kid," he said, "I think it's time I return the favor." Jamal's brows knit together. "What do you mean?" Mr. Bennet patted his shoulder. "I'm going to change your life." Jamal's breath caught. He had no idea what was coming next. Jamal sat frozen, staring at Mr. Bennet. The man he had believed was just another homeless stranger in need. But now that same man stood tall, no longer hunched over in ragged clothes, but exuding the quiet power of someone who had everything. Jamal's mind spun. This had to be a dream. "Kid," Mr. Bennet said, his voice warm but firm, "I'm going to help you, and not just with a meal." Jamal swallowed, still confused. "Help me." "How?" Mr. Bennet crouched down so they were at eye level. "You and your mom. You're struggling, aren't you?" Jamal hesitated, then nodded slowly. "She works. 2 jobs. We barely get by." Mr. Bennet sighed, as if that answer hurt him more than he expected. Then he smiled softly. "Well, not anymore." Jamal blinked in shock. "What do you mean?" Mr. Bennet rested a hand on Jamal's shoulder. "I'm giving your mom a new home. A real home, where she won't have to worry about rent or bills or whether she can afford groceries." Jamal's jaw dropped. Mr. Bennet continued, his expression serious. "And you, kid, you're going to get an education. A good one. I'll cover your school fees, your books, whatever you need. You're going to have every opportunity to succeed." Jamal couldn't process what he was hearing. His heart pounded so loudly in his ears it drowned out the sound of the cars passing by. His lips parted, but only one question came out. "But why?" Mr. Bennet's smile grew. "Because kindness should be rewarded." The story spread, faster than wildfire. By the next day, the headlines read, "Millionaire disguises himself as homeless. A poor boy's kindness changes his life forever." News stations picked it up. Social media exploded. People couldn't believe it. A young boy with nothing to his name had given so selflessly and in return had been given everything. More than that, the story sparked a movement. People in the community started looking at the homeless differently. Food drives were organized. Shelters received more donations than ever before. It was as if the world had been reminded that kindness still existed, and that they could be a part of it. One by one, people started helping, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And it all started with a boy and a sandwich. That evening, Jamal ran home faster than he ever had before. Bursting through the door, he found his mother, exhausted from work, sitting at their small kitchen table, counting the last few bills she had left. "Mom!" Jamal gasped, breathless. His mother looked up, concern flashing in her tired eyes. "Jamal, what's wrong?" Jamal shook his head, a huge smile breaking across his face. "Nothing's wrong, Mama. Everything is finally right." And then he told her everything. The old man, the sandwich, the truth about Mr. Bennet. At first, his mother didn't believe him. Who would? But then the phone rang. It was Mr. Bennet. And when she heard his voice, when she heard the sincerity in his words, tears filled her eyes. Her struggles, their pain, the constant weight on her shoulders, were finally over. But not because they had asked for help. Not because they had begged. But because Jamal gave without expecting anything in return. She pulled Jamal into a tight hug, sobbing into his hair. I'm so proud of you," she whispered. So proud." A week later, Jamal and his mother stood outside their new home. It was beautiful. Nothing extravagant, but warm, safe, and filled with love. Mr. Bennett stood beside them, watching as Jamal's mother wiped away tears of disbelief. Then he turned to Jamal, his eyes kind. "You reminded me of something. I had forgotten, kid," he said. Jamal looked up. "What's that?" Mr. Bennett smiled, his voice soft but full of truth. "Sometimes the poorest people are the richest in kindness." And at that moment, Jamal understood. Jamal stood outside his new home, staring up at it in awe. Just days ago, he had been walking the same streets, worried about his next meal. Now, everything had changed, not because he had asked for help, but because he had given without expecting anything in return. Mr. Bennett patted his shoulder one last time. "Never stop being who you are, kid. The world needs more people like you." Jamal smiled. He didn't need riches to feel rich. He had already been wealthy in the one thing that mattered most: kindness. Because at the end of the day, one act of kindness can change a life forever. Now, we want to hear from you. What would you have done in Jamal's place? Have you ever experienced kindness when you least expected it? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us of the true power of kindness. And this is just the beginning. Stay tuned for another inspiring tale coming soon. Because the world is full of stories waiting to be told and lessons waiting to be learned.